by and large, it is always most convincing if we experience something ourselves, isn't it? You may know that situation, someone tells you about a movie, this is so fantastic, and okay, maybe you believe it or you don't believe it. Maybe you believe it, then you go to see the movie and it's not fantastic at all, you don't like it. Or the same as music, someone tells you, listen to that, or food, try this special dish. But tastes differ. On the other hand, once you eat that, or once you see that movie, then obviously you will know whether you like it or whether it's good for your taste. So even more so with the Dhamma, it's good if we have that confidence, that faith in the Buddha, in the Dhamma. But it tends to be more convincing if we at least some of it, if we can see it happening in our own conscious awareness. Now, this is what the Buddha is basically talking about all the time. What we call our life, what we call our experience, what we feel, and the pain we are experiencing, and the increase or decrease of pain. It's not something abstract theoretically. It's concerned with what we feel in our heart right now and throughout our life. So when it comes to craving, talking about Four Noble Truths, Asala Puja, where the Buddha first expounded these Four Noble Truths. Now the first Noble Truth of suffering, second Noble Truth, the cause of suffering, namely craving, the third Noble Truth, the end of suffering, namely the complete letting go, abandonment, extirpation of this very craving. And finally, number 4, the Noble Eightfold Path, the middle way, the middle procedure to abandon craving. When it comes to craving, what normally happens, that it gives us this promise: if we follow the craving, we will be happy. This is unfortunately also reinforced in our society by all advertisement, by all the stuff they want to sell you. Now, how do we get happy? Now, by satisfying our craving. Here the Buddha points out the direct opposite. So this is a huge and not easy reconditioning process. And the first thing is not even just to convince ourselves. Because if you have been told ever since, and if that is the tendency of your mind already for countless lifetimes, trying to get happy by following craving, and suddenly now to reverse that, and being told that abandoning craving rather than following it is actually the way out of suffering. And it is obviously difficult. So it's good when we can observe that. Because that is the only way to really abandon craving. And not by willpower, not by trying hard, however hard we try, but by knowing, by seeing, by observing, by understanding, by wisely seeing, by seeing according to reality, by seeing it as it truly is, in a vipassana. So first of all, what we have to identify with mindfulness. It's good to have the mindfulness going all the time. And then mindfulness can notice, hopefully, when craving arises. But the first step, that we cannot understand something that we are not aware of, that we don't even notice. And these things happen quite quickly, and like the fish in water, we are so used to craving being kind of always present in our mind in some form, and then we automatically following it and trying to satisfy it. That is already a major exercise to become aware of that process, and that's the very first important step of later abandoning it. And so just check out how well does it work. Does it actually keep that promise? These things are always operating together, in a craving and delusion, a craving, ignorance. As you know, we can also abandon all craving by abandoning all ignorance. Because if you abandon one or the other, then the other is also abandoned. If there's no more ignorance, no more delusion, there would be no more craving. If there's no more craving, then there would be no more ignorance and delusion, because they work together. And the one way delusion comes in by bringing this big promise. Now you will be happy if you get that. And just like the donkey who is running after the carrot which is dangled in front of his nose, so we run lifetime after lifetime in samsara after all these things, cravingness, dangling in front of our nose. So we have to observe, now how well does it work? Are you really so happy now? I gave the example when the meditation is over and then, now I can stretch. When you're sitting there, maybe an hour is easy for you, but if you really sit much longer than you normally easily can, you will notice it's extremely painful and there's an extremely strong craving to change the posture. And when we have strong pain, it looks like now all I need to be happy forever is being rid of that pain. Have you ever been really sick? And so painfully sick, even just a bad flu? And does it not appear that life would be paradise if only this pain could go away? So are you so sick now? Or is that pain away from the last bad sickness? Is all gone now? No? Is life now the total paradise like it appeared at that time? No. And it's always the same. So mindfully observe that. Obviously, some cravings are better not to satisfy. If you have a craving to kill other beings or getting really sloshed and things like that, I don't recommend satisfying that. But there's many others, like just even eating simple things. Just observe it, the big promise, and then you go after it. You get that thing. Now there's this funny, ironic quote, there's only two tragedies in the life of a human being. Number one is never to have one's greatest craving satisfied. And number two is to have one's greatest craving satisfied. And of these two, the second is by far the worst. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you get the point. Because once you have such a strong craving and you finally get it, and you're still in the same situation, a new craving will come, nothing is over, and this whole illusion crashes. If you actually never get that, you may continue in thinking, then I will be happy. But in Dhamma terms, it's actually not the greatest tragedy, and it would be very helpful. So we have to observe it. The thing you feel you need for your happiness, and then if you get it, check it out. Usually we immediately forget about it and rush to the next thing, but we observe it now. The other thing to observe is if we succeed of doing the opposite, rather than indulging the craving, going against it, and ideally letting go of it, letting go of the deep underlying tendency, the very deeply anchored in the subconscious craving, totally, that's obviously only achieved by very deep insight. That's a stage of enlightenment, but just even some specific craving for something. And the moment we can let go, you will notice that you're much lighter, it's much easier. And hopefully you could observe that in your meditation. informal meditation. Because what is it that stops us from just staying with a meditation object for an hour or 2 or 5? Why is that so difficult? We're breathing all the time anyhow, and now just being aware, feeling the breath, or just repeating Buddha-ho, Buddha-ho, Buddha-ho. We can do that for 10 times, no issue. So why is it so difficult to do it for an hour longer? Because of craving. So we can mindfully observe that in our meditation, or we are staying, breathing in, breathing out, Buddha, Buddha, whatever you do. And then it's craving that is pushing us away. And why is it pushing us away? Because it creates this illusion that something else gives us more happiness than staying with Buddha or staying with the breath. And here we can again investigate that, how craving is deceiving us. Because if you meditate and then comes some idea, and there's maybe some memory of some past experience, sensuality, and a beautiful holiday or whatever you enjoy, and then you start remembering that and fantasizing, it can feel quite nice in the beginning. But how far do you get like that? And then after a while, for example, it's no longer enough to just imagine that. But then you really want to do it. But when I, for example, if I were to imagine some exciting party, that is when I was in my 20s, the last parties I had, after that I'm a monk, so I couldn't go back to that anyhow. I'm an old man now. Would not be possible to live that kind of life anymore. And then you may feel disappointed. This is how it usually goes. Look at that. At first it may appear very nice to abandon your meditation object, indulge some little craving, but it doesn't really work in the end. And that is an important one to notice. And to notice what does it feel in comparison if you stay with a meditation object. What we have to distinguish here is very important, the different forms of happiness. Because staying with a meditation object and then experience that wholesome happiness from the mind gradually settling down in samatha, settling down on the wholesome meditation object, is a very refined happiness. Whereas if we indulge in some sensual fantasies, there's a very worldly, sensual happiness. And the one thing which we have to learn to distinguish is the distinction between these two. And then redirect our craving to the refined happiness from meditation, rather than the coarse happiness from sensuality and indulgence, even if it's only fantasies. An interesting fact is that we are also craving amazingly to indulge in things that make us angry. It's quite fascinating. One can easier understand that one gives up the meditation object to follow some alluring fantasy. You're planning the big cruise you're doing once you're retired, $50,000 cruise, and you're planning that in your mind. That can be very exciting and quite a bit of pleasant feeling when you think about that. But we are also getting taken away by our meditation object, from our meditation object, by thinking about how someone has hurt us and how mean that was and how bad these people are in general. Isn't that fascinating? Because usually, if you get a nice fantasy to indulge in, it usually feels good at least. But this one, once you think about how they hurt you and how bad they are, what does it feel like? Notice it mindfully. It doesn't feel good at all. No? Indulging in anger and resentment and negative memories, and it makes us straight away unhappy and feeling unpleasant. But interestingly, we are still attached to that. We are still kind of craving that. I mean, so many people, do the news, does it usually make you happy, watching the news? Is there much which gives you a really uplifting, joyful feeling? Nevertheless, we tend to be quite addicted to that. So why do we crave that? When people go and watch horror movies, just to experience horror, quite funny. So the thing is, we have to notice that. The problem is the lack of awareness, the lack of noticing, the lack of observing. We have to notice that we can also be attached and crave even these negative experiences. At least it's exciting. At least it gives us a feeling of being, of existing, of something happening. And at least it's not boredom. If you're angry, you're at least not bored. But now watch it. And then you move to that and then see if you indulge in these news or in this negative memory, that actually feels very bad. That one is easier to abandon. The Buddha said that the defilement of anger, negativity, aversion, that's the easier one to abandon. And that is the very reason, because it feels immediately bad, and it's easier to abandon something that straight away makes you feel bad. If we have enough mindfulness, you just have to clearly see it. The other side, sensuality, craving, desire, the Buddha said that is very sticky, that's very difficult to abandon. It takes much more time and effort. Why? Because it does feel good. The Buddha doesn't deny that you can get pleasant feeling from sensuality and so on. So we have to be sharper with our wisdom. We have to be very clear with our observance. Now, first of all, recognizing, following the craving on the side of the indulgence, desire, that it's an inferior kind of happiness. So we have to be very mindful when we meditate, or also when you develop other forms of wholesome happiness, like generosity, like keeping precepts, like helping other beings, like listening to Dhamma, chanting. This is all spiritual, wholesome happiness. Happiness connected with letting go and developing the path. So we have to carefully observe that and learn to notice the difference, and then directing the mind more to the more refined happiness, and recognizing the whole coarse and vulgar, as you were chanting. Ino gamo potujaniko anario, the low, vulgar, like uncultivated, unrefined, inferior. Hino, low. We have to learn that in our own observation, that the essential happiness is something coarse and low. And the other thing, of course, that it doesn't last, that it never keeps a promise. And in fact, the better it is, the worse when it's over. And notice in even little things. Sometimes people give me this really nice tea. And if you then get this really nice tea, you start drinking it, and it feels really nice drinking that. But if you drink that all the time, you're not getting much happiness out of that anymore. It just becomes normal. But then you go back to Lipton or something, and then then this one you notice, and it's no longer so good. And it's always the same. Even if you can succeed in getting all these nice things, after a time you get jaded. It doesn't satisfy anymore. You need to increase the dosage. Or you have to get something new, exciting. You're calling the bluff. It's all about noticing and observing that. And the other thing so important when we look for the causes of suffering, we talked about that already at noon, but it bears repeating. This is very common, and you will see that even in an animal. The moment it hurts, any kind of human, any kind of animal even, they will kind of investigate because they want to get rid of the hurt. But the big problem is that we are so conditioned to look for external causes of our suffering. This person, or maybe the weather, or maybe this kind of politics, or this politician. There's always something outside. And it's not necessarily completely wrong, but the problem with the external causes is that, first of all, they may be outside of your control, because if someone is more powerful and they cause you suffering, if you try not to resist that, you may get even more suffering because they have the power to do that. Or it's something that you have no influence. There may be even Australian politics, your influence is probably quite limited. But if it's something happening in the US, what is your power to change any of the politics the US is doing? But you may maybe suffer from it. The other thing is, even if we can influence it, maybe you have one person who seems to be difficult and seems to be giving you so much pain and suffering, and maybe you are more powerful, and then you can force them to stop that, or you can maybe wheedle them or convince them or nagging until they change, or all kinds of ways of manipulating that person. But I mean, even if you succeed with great effort, then another person comes along and gives you a headache, or you get sick, it has nothing to do with that person. It's just not very effective. There will always be something else. This is why the Buddha points to the much deeper causes, which is in our own mind, the craving. You could also say attachment. You could also say clinging. You could actually put in any of the links in the chain of dependent origination. Affection, you could say affection. This is actually one advantage, that to create something, it usually takes many conditions. For example, for a human being to live, just the very basic ones. You need food, you need water and a drink, and you need air to breathe and oxygen. And you will not bring up a human if any of these is lacking, but you need all three to get them going, to keep them going. But if someone wanted to kill a human being, you have to remove only one of those, and the human can't exist. Is somewhat similar with suffering. There's obviously many causes, many causal factors for our suffering. But if you remove any of the necessary conditions, then it means the suffering will be gone. And in the dependent origination, the Buddha has given quite a few of necessary conditions, but if one of them is removed, then the suffering is gone. So it doesn't mean that these external conditions are not valid. And if I suffer because it's too cold, then obviously there's an external cause for that, and we have a cold weather. And I can change that and can get rid of that suffering by putting on the heater or the air conditioning. That is not wrong, but there are so many other things I can suffer from that I'm constantly trying to control my environment, and my body is still never 100% comfortable. Whereas with the internal conditions, that is one which removes suffering completely. If you remove external cold, there's only a little bit of suffering gone. But if you remove craving from your heart, or if you remove attachment or clinging or affection or delusion or ignorance, it's completely gone. And that is for a much more powerful approach. So again, the first thing I recommend, observing that how we are conditioned to always look for causes of suffering, but externally. This is so deeply ingrained, and you will notice that the moment it hurts, you look outside, and we have to redirect that. Whenever it hurts, just ask, where's the attachment in my heart? Where's the clinging? Where's the delusion? Where's the craving? Rather than asking, who is at fault of these people? It's difficult. It's also challenging, because it appears easier to blame it on something outside, because then it's not my fault, so to speak. It's not really anyone's fault anyhow. Entity view is a delusion, the self is a delusion, but it's a fault of craving, it's a fault of attachment. Now this is more successful than you identify the true enemies. Usually we feel an enemy is someone who causes us an unpleasant feeling and pain. But even, which I much hope or trust that has never happened to you, but even if you were tortured in a torture chamber, what these people are doing to you would be nothing compared to what craving has done to you over countless lifetimes. Now, this is a true enemy. But that's a hidden one. So rather than always blaming other people outside, we have to blame the true culprits and the ones which are the gang leaders. There's a little bit, if you have a problem with the mafia, and obviously they have their hitmen and their bullies, and if you don't comply, you're not paying the mafia. Then the bullies would come threatening you and your family, and maybe you can fight with the bullies, but that will never be a real solution, because they have many, and even if we can knock one of them out, they just send another one. But if somehow the police can get the godfather, the big boss, then the whole mafia structure collapses and is all over. So similar, if you can really get craving or attachment or ignorance, delusion, and get that one and remove that one, and then craving is gone and can never come back, and then suffering is gone and can never come back. So maybe to sum it up, some suggestion on Asala Puja. The Buddha first expounded the Four Noble Truths. Craving as a source of suffering, the important one is to observe it, to know it, and to see that suffering is caused by craving. The duty for suffering is to know it, to comprehend it, and that includes noticing that it comes from craving. And to observe how we are getting caught up in the conditioned program of following and indulging craving, thinking that gives us happiness, which is the very opposite of what the Buddha was teaching. And so we have, first of all, to observe, following the craving, it actually doesn't give us the happiness as promised. Secondly, we have to observe doing the opposite, not following the craving and letting go, at least if it's not the full deep one, but just some specific craving, and then seeing in our own experience that the suffering is gone, that particular suffering connected with it. Now this is very powerful to encourage us to continue on that track. And then distinguishing between different forms of gratification, and then redirecting it to the more wholesome one, rather not the low, vulgar, inferior happiness of sensuality, but the more refined, beautiful happiness of the path of letting go, of generosity, virtue, sense restraint, and a samadhi and insight. There's a lot of happiness to get there. And finally, to recognize this tendency that we quite naturally investigate craving, because when it hurts, it's quite normal that you want to look what to do. But now we are looking for the causes outside. That is a conditioning instead, inside. It has to become almost like a reflex, automatic. When it hurts, not this automatically blaming outside, but immediately looking, where's the attachment in my heart? Where's a craving in my heart? Where's a delusion there? Where's the identification? Where's the taking up? Where's the appropriating, the ownership, the sense of ownership? Where's the entity view, the Sakaya Ditti? There's the true causes, the true, powerful, deep causes of that suffering. And that is much more powerful, because if you remove that cause, that condition, then the craving, then suffering is completely gone. Whereas, as you have noticed, if you succeed in removing one of these external causes, there's endless external causes for our suffering. If you just remove one, you get a short break, in the best case, and then some other form of suffering and disappointment comes. Whereas if you remove the deep craving completely, then it's good forever.